April 1945. Berlin was a graveyard of concrete and steel. The Soviet army advanced street by street. Inside the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler vanished. He retreated into a bunker complex deep underground. He was surrounded by a few loyal officers and the smell of damp concrete. This was the total collapse of the Third Reich. What happened next remains a blur of history. The facts are buried under fragmented testimonies and manipulated evidence. For decades, world governments and intelligence agencies provided conflicting reports. Forensic experts disagreed on the suicide, the burning of the bodies, and the final location of the remains. Why is the record so inconsistent? At first glance, a clear-cut suicide, but in reality, a maze of contradictions. Soviet documents often countered Western reports. Dental records were questioned. Legends of escape to South America or secret bases in Antarctica emerged. None of these theories closed the case. Events accelerated. Was this a massive cover-up operation? Did Hitler actually die in the ruins of his capital? Or did the most notorious criminal of the century escape justice? April 29, 1945. Soviet artillery shells shook the bunker walls. Inside, Hitler married Eva Braun in a hasty civil ceremony. They signed the papers and shook hands with the staff. It was a wedding in a tomb. 24 hours later, the situation changed. Both were dead. The witnesses described a grim scene. The air was thick with the smell of explosives and sweat. Heinz Linge, Hitler's personal valet, opened the door to the private study. He reported what he saw. The footage of the aftermath does not exist, but the descriptions are vivid. Hitler sat on a blood-stained sofa. A single bullet hole marked his right temple. Eva Braun lay beside him. She had no visible wounds. Instead, the room smelled of bitter almonds. This was the scent of cyanide. There was no turning back. But here, the official story begins to crack. The details provided by the inner circle did not always match. Otto Günsche, Hitler's personal adjutant, began his own account of the cleanup. He helped carry the bodies into the garden above. The sound of Soviet rockets was constant. Soldiers poured gasoline over the remains. Flames rose in the middle of a war zone. The evidence was turning to ash. This was the end of the official version. Heinz Linge, the personal valet, and Raucous Misch, the radio operator, told different stories. Their accounts of the final moments did not align. Misch reported specific smells and sounds that contradicted what other witnesses claimed to hear. These inconsistencies were not minor. They were structural. Perhaps trauma and chaos clouded their memory, or perhaps they were hiding a deeper truth. What happened after the gunshot is even more complex. Hitler had issued a final command. He ordered his remains to be destroyed. He had seen photos of Benito Mussolini. He knew the Italian partisans had hung Mussolini's corpse in a public square. Hitler refused to become a trophy. Ling and Otto Günsche claimed they carried the bodies to the Chancellery garden. They dragged them to a bomb crater and poured gasoline over them. The video shows the scene, thick black smoke rising over the bunker. Soviet artillery shells were landing every few seconds. For 3 hours, the two men reportedly kept the fire burning. But one fact stops the investigation: gasoline. In April 1945, Berlin was a graveyard. Fuel was more precious than gold. Every drop was reserved for the last remaining tanks and trucks. How much fuel did they really have? Modern forensic experts have analyzed the site. They doubt an open-air fire could destroy a human body. Bones do not turn to ash in a garden pit. To incinerate a corpse completely, you need an industrial furnace. You need temperatures above 1,000 degrees Celsius for several hours. A bomb crater and a few jerry cans are not enough. Each witness had a reason to lie. The Soviet SMERSH units handled the interrogations. This organization was famous for its brutal methods. They did not just ask questions. They broke bones and used sleep deprivation to get the answers they wanted. The guards were not questioned immediately. The Soviets held them in prisons for months. Some were interrogated for years. There's a strange pattern in the files. Usually, trauma destroys memory. Witnesses to a violent event should disagree on the small details. It is a natural human reaction to shock. But these accounts were different. They were nearly identical. Every guard and every secretary described the exact same sequence of events. At first glance, this is a solid consensus, but in reality, it looks like a script. The coherence is too perfect. It suggests the stories were rehearsed behind prison walls. They all spoke with one voice. This raises a single question. Who gave them the script? The Soviets wanted a specific ending. The witnesses provided it. The official record was sealed. Thus ended the investigation. April 30th, 1945. A wedding, a final will, a pistol shot, and cyanide. Then, the cremation in the garden of the Reich Chancellery. The timing was exact. Too exact. It appeared less like a chaotic end and more like a rehearsed synchronization. The Soviets arrived at the scene. They claimed to have found dental remains inside a shell crater. According to the official report, these teeth confirmed the identity of Adolf Hitler. Two key witnesses emerged, Kata Häusermann and Fritz Echtmann. Both were assistants to Hitler's personal dentist. Interrogators showed them the fragments. Häusermann and Echtmann identified the dental bridges as belonging to the Führer. But a physical anomaly existed. The dental bridges were found separated from any part of the jawbone. In a standard cremation, even an incomplete one, teeth remain embedded in the bone. The heat does not naturally eject them. The separation of the prosthesis points to manual intervention. It suggests someone deliberately placed these pieces in the dirt to be found. The Soviet secret police interrogated the assistants separately. Neither had access to Hitler's original medical files during the questioning. Yet, they provided identical answers. Both had spent years working on Hitler's teeth. They knew the bridges, the crowns, and the fillings. But there was another factor. Their lives were at stake. They were prisoners of the Soviet Union. Under the pressure of a Stalinist interrogation, the power of suggestion is absolute. They knew what the Soviets wanted to hear. The case seemed closed in 2017. Philippe Charlier, a prominent French forensic expert, announced a breakthrough. He claimed to have confirmed the teeth belonged to Hitler. His findings appeared in a major European medical journal. But the methodology raises questions. Charlier did not have independent access to the physical remains. He worked primarily with photographs and fragments provided by the Russian authorities. No independent DNA tests were performed on the dental fragments. His entire analysis relied on morphological comparisons. He compared the remains to X-rays taken in 1944. The matches were precise. However, this creates a new problem. If an organization wanted to fabricate evidence, they would use those exact X-rays as a blueprint. Dental technology in the 1940s was highly advanced. Technicians could reproduce specific bridges and crowns using existing molds and references. The official narrative suffered a massive blow in 2009. Scientists performed a DNA analysis on a skull fragment held in the Soviet archives. For decades, the Kremlin claimed this skull belonged to Hitler. The results were shocking. The bone belonged to a woman. She was between 20 and 40 years old. This discovery destroyed a pillar of the Soviet forensic case. It shifted the perspective from investigation to suspicion. If the Soviets were wrong about the skull, the reliability of the teeth is compromised. A pattern of falsification begins to emerge. The Soviet cover-up was not a mistake. It was a strategy. May 1945. The myth of the fugitive Hitler began. Joseph Stalin possessed information that the rest of the world ignored. 9 days after the reported death of the Führer, Western newspapers celebrated the end of the war. But Stalin spoke privately to Harry Hopkins, the personal envoy of President Truman. He stated that Hitler was not dead. He claimed the dictator was hiding. This was not the rambling of a paranoid man. It was a calculated move. Stalin had access to intelligence sources that were closed to the West. June 9, 1945, Marshal Georgy Zhukov held a press conference. He announced that Soviet forces had not found Hitler's corpse. He stated they could not confirm his death. This happened weeks after Soviet troops had reportedly identified dental remains in the ruins. The contradictions were deliberate. It was a disinformation operation orchestrated by the Kremlin. The strategy was precise. The Soviets kept real evidence secret while feeding survival rumors to the public. The Potsdam Conference followed. Stalin told Truman directly that Hitler likely escaped to Spain or Argentina. The American delegation recorded these words. The notes leaked to the global press. These leaks planted the seeds for escape theories that lasted for decades. Why did Stalin create this confusion? It served two strategic purposes. First, it justified a permanent Soviet military presence in Germany. A living Hitler was a permanent threat. Second, it delegitimized the West. It suggested that Western powers were protecting Nazi fugitives. The Soviets began the most exhaustive investigation in history. It was called Operation Myth. Stalin issued the direct order himself. The NKVD conducted 800 interrogations. They seized thousands of documents and analyzed every bone fragment from the bunker. A specialized team worked for 4 years. They produced a 413-page dossier. This document contained more data than any archive in the West. The dossier was a massive collection of evidence. It contained photographs of charred remains and complete transcripts of interrogations. It held detailed dental charts and a minute-by-minute chronology of the final hours in the bunker. Stalin wrote a note by hand on the margin of the final report. The text read, "Special Archive, not for distribution." The Soviet leader had the truth. He decided the world was not ready for it. The witnesses disappeared. Käthe Häusermann and Fritz Echtmann identified the dental remains. They were immediately sent to Siberian labor camps. Their crime was knowing too much. They stayed in captivity for 10 years. By the time they were released in the 1950s, their testimonies were irrelevant. The world had already accepted the narrative of confusion. The silence was complete. Thus ended the investigation. 1945. The Soviet Union seized total control of the physical evidence. They cordoned off the bunker area and kept it under armed guard for years. Western researchers could not get close. Every fragment, personal object, and document found in the ruins was cataloged and moved. These items disappeared into classified facilities in Moscow. Why did the Soviets hide the site? It seemed like a security measure, but the goal was the destruction of the truth. When Western investigators finally entered the bunker in the 1950s, the scene was unrecognizable. The walls were repainted, the floors were replaced, every trace of forensic evidence was gone. The footage shows empty concrete rooms with fresh paint. The smell of original gunpowder and blood had been replaced by industrial chemicals. This was not a restoration, it was a wipe. The manipulation of facts was systematic. The Kremlin produced 3 different versions of Hitler's fate. They told Western governments one story. They told the Soviet population a second story. They gave international media a third conflicting account. This was a strategy of multiple disinformation. It ensured that no single narrative could ever become the official truth. Events accelerated in 1968. Soviet journalist Lev Bezymensky published a book titled The Death of Adolf Hitler. He claimed to use secret archives. The book stated that Hitler died from cyanide poisoning alone. This contradicted all previous testimonies about a gunshot to the head. At first glance, a breakthrough in the investigation, but in reality, a state-ordered fabrication. It was later revealed that the KGB instructed Bezymensky to write this specific version. The objective was to muddy the waters and keep the global debate alive. Confusion was the weapon. There was no turning back. In 1970, KGB chief Yuri Andropov made the final decision. For 25 years, the state had preserved bone and dental fragments in secret boxes. Soldiers moved these remains to a forest near Magdeburg. The process was clinical. They built a fire and incinerated every remaining fragment. Nothing was left but gray dust. The soldiers scattered the ashes into a local river in the forest floor. The sound of the wind in the trees was the only witness. The physical trail ended there. Thus ended the investigation. April 4th, 1970, Soviet agents dumped the remains into the Elbe River. The current carried the ash away. This act destroyed any chance for an independent forensic analysis. It was permanent. It was final. The official reason was simple: prevent the site from becoming a shrine for neo-Nazis. But the timing of the destruction points to a different motive. The Kremlin wanted the truth gone. Declassified documents from the 1990s reveal the scale of the operation. The Soviets did not just hide evidence. They built a machine for historical distortion. They manipulated the facts of Hitler's death as a test case. This became the blueprint for Cold War disinformation. It was a pilot experiment in psychological warfare. The consequences remain visible 80 years later. Conspiracy theories about the bunker did not emerge by accident. They were manufactured in Moscow. The Soviet state launched a calculated campaign to sow doubt. They created the mystery to keep the West off balance. Control over history proved to be as effective as the occupation of territory. The question remains, who actually died in the bunker? Some evidence suggests a more disturbing reality. Hitler may not have escaped. He may never have been there during the final days. The footage from 1945 shows a man in decline. But was it the Führer? During the final months of the war, Hitler used multiple body doubles. These men were selected for their bone structure and height. They spent months learning to mimic his voice and his specific physical tics. They stood in for him at rallies. They walked through bombed-out streets. Gustav Wehler and Heinrich Bergner were the primary decoys. Wehler was a former actor. He understood mimicry better than a soldier. The camera records him wearing the same uniform, the same mustache, and the same stooped posture. In the chaos of the fall of Berlin, these doubles became the ultimate insurance policy. The records show that one double was found with a bullet hole in the forehead. He was wearing Hitler's socks. But the dental records did not match. The trail went cold in the ruins. The Soviets found the body. They photographed it. Then they made it disappear. Thus ended the official investigation. Bergner, a high-ranking party official, underwent minor plastic surgery. The goal was simple: to sharpen his resemblance to the leader. By late April 1945, both Bergner and another key double vanished. They were erased from all official records. No death certificates were issued to their families. No bodies were recovered for burial. They simply ceased to exist. Why use a double at the end? Hitler's physical state made it easy. By 1945, the dictator was a wreck. His left hand shook constantly. His posture was hunched. His skin was pale and his walk was labored. These were physical markers. Any trained actor could exaggerate these symptoms to portray a leader on the verge of collapse. March 20th, 1945. This was the date of Hitler's last confirmed public appearance. He reviewed a group of Hitler youth. The footage exists, but modern forensic analysis reveals anomalies. The camera catches specific details. The height of the man in the film does not match Hitler's recorded measurements. The right hand moves with a different rhythm than in previous footage. Most notably, the individual avoids the camera. He refuses to show the left side of his face. That was the location of a distinctive scar from the 1923 Munich Putsch. The bunker evidence is equally inconsistent. Soldiers found blood on the sofa where the suicide supposedly occurred, but the biology did not match. Reich medical records list Hitler as type A. The Soviet analysis of the sofa stains identified type B. The discrepancy was noted in secret reports. It was never explained to the public. Then there is the issue of the remains. A standard open-air cremation is never complete. Fragments of soft tissue and internal organs usually survive. These would allow for toxicological tests to prove cyanide poisoning. But no soft tissues were found. The remains appeared prepared. Someone had ensured no biological evidence remained to contradict the story. 2009. That was the year the narrative shifted again. Forensic testing revealed that a skull, long thought to be Hitler's, actually belonged to a woman. If the Soviets were wrong about the skull, they were wrong about the identity. This suggests a calculated scene. Multiple bodies were likely used to stage a double suicide. Was Eva Braun there? Perhaps not. Numerous young women worked in the chancellery. Many disappeared during the final chaos of the fall of Berlin. Any one of them could have occupied the sofa. The witnesses tell a specific story. Linga and Gunsche were the men closest to the Führer. They claimed to see the bodies, but under this theory, they were not observers. They were operatives. They were the only people capable of distinguishing the real man from the double. Their role in the cremation was not to honor a leader, but to destroy the evidence of a switch. The logistics were complex, but they were not impossible. Martin Bormann held the keys to the chancellery. He had consolidated total control over the inner circle. He had the means to execute the deception. He had the motive to ensure the trail went cold. Thus, the official story began. Martin Bormann. As the man who controlled every access point to Hitler during the final years, he held the perfect position to coordinate a body substitution. His own fate remains a blank space in history. Workers discovered a body identified as Bormann in 1972. DNA analysis in 1998 confirmed the match, but the science could not explain the location. It could not explain why the body was buried with such precision in that specific spot. The cremation process provided the ultimate window for a switch. It lasted 3 hours. During this time, a small group of conspirators had total control. They could have swapped the remains in total secrecy. Outside the bunker, the world was ending. Constant Soviet shelling shook the ground. Thick black smoke covered the ruins of Berlin. This chaos served as a functional screen for clandestine movements. Soviet forensic experts noticed the cracks in the story immediately. Their preliminary notes reported anatomical inconsistencies. These files were later suppressed. The reports described significant discrepancies in height and bone structure. The remains found in the garden belonged to a man smaller and lighter than Adolf Hitler. These measurements did not match the dictator's official medical records. Why were these facts removed from the final Soviet reports? It points to a deliberate intervention. Someone wanted to bury the contradictions. There is a total lack of visual proof. The Nazis documented everything. They filmed their rituals, their rallies, and their crimes. But there is not a single photograph of the bodies of Hitler or Eva Braun. No film exists of the corpses before they were burned. This omission is an anomaly. The cremation was described as a solemn, formal event. High-ranking officers stood in attendance. Yet, no one reached for a camera. Hitler's behavior in the final days supports the double theory. Witnesses saw a man resign to his fate, but he was also obsessed with one detail: the total destruction of his physical form. He gave specific instructions for his body to be reduced to ash. This was not just a fear of posthumous desecration. It was a calculated move to eliminate forensic evidence. Then there is the dental evidence. Many consider it a closed case. In reality, it is not. Hitler's dental bridges were removable devices. They were not permanent fixtures. These prostheses could have been extracted and placed into the mouth of a double after death. Identification based on a bridge without the attached mandibular bone is not definitive proof. It is a transferable piece of evidence. Argentina was the final stop. It was not a random choice for fugitives. It was a pre-built industrial protection machine. The South American nation was specifically prepared to receive the high command of the Third Reich. This was the system known as the Ratlines. These secret routes were designed for one purpose: the disappearance of the most wanted men in the world. The escape was not a desperate flight. It was a logistics operation. 1943. The Second World War was far from over. But in Argentina, Juan Domingo Perón was already looking at the map. He did not wait for the fall of Berlin. He began planning the arrival of high-ranking Nazis 2 years before the first Soviet soldier entered the Reich Chancellery. These were not improvised escape routes. These were established state-sanctioned networks. The operation functioned with surgical precision. It involved the highest levels of religious and political power. Monsignor Krunoslav Draganovich operated from the San Girolamo confraternity in Rome. He did not just help fugitives, he coordinated the production of false documents. These papers carried official Vatican seals. The authenticity was unquestionable. How did a mass murderer become a common citizen? The answer was total identity erasure. Fugitives received entire life stories. The network produced false baptismal records dating back 30 years. These were not just forged passports. These were complete biographies. They included school records, employment histories, and family trees. Every lie was backed by a paper trail. Adolf Eichmann was the primary example. He arrived at the port of Buenos Aires in 1950. His new name was Ricardo Clement. His documents listed him as a telecommunications technician born in Austria. For 10 years, the architect of the Holocaust lived in the suburbs. He worked for a German car manufacturer. He raised his children. He attended regular meetings with other former Nazis. They drank beer and discussed the politics of the fallen Reich. But in reality, he was never truly hiding. His capture by the Mossad in 1960 stunned the world. The footage of his trial showed a man in a glass booth. It revealed that he hadn't been a desperate fugitive. He was a man supported by an organization with unlimited financial resources. The network protected its own. Josef Mengele arrived even earlier. The doctor of Auschwitz did not live in the shadows. He established an elaborate social existence. The Argentine government provided more than just papers. He received a house and a high-paying job at a pharmaceutical company. He became a fixture of Buenos Aires high society. The camera records the reality of his exile. Mengele attended the opera. He was a guest at academic seminars. He shook hands with the Argentine intellectual elite. He moved through the most expensive neighborhoods of the capital without fear. For years, the man responsible for horrific experiments was a socialite. Thus, the network functioned. 1946, Erich Priebke arrived in Argentina. No one suspected his true identity. He settled in Bariloche, a mountain town. He became a respected figure in the local German community. For almost 50 years, he lived openly. He directed a school. He led community organizations. He wrote letters to other ex-Nazis scattered across South America. How did he stay hidden for so long? At first glance, a fugitive in hiding, but in reality, a protected citizen. Priebke did not live in terror. He had guarantees. These promises allowed him to live a normal, productive life. He was not alone. The infrastructure for this network was massive. Argentina established immigration offices in European cities. Specially trained agents worked there. They evaluated candidates for resettlement. Priority went to the technically valuable. This included engineers, scientists, and administrators. The Peronist regime also set specific quotas for political leaders. They wanted men with experience in organization and propaganda. The system worked, but this was only the beginning. Declassified FBI archives contain hundreds of reports. They describe sightings of Adolf Hitler in South America. Most were dismissed. They lacked evidence. But some reports contained specific details. These cases required serious attention. The case of Philip Citrin stands out. Citrin was not a fantasist. He was a German merchant. Records show he had verifiable connections in Colombia and Argentina. He provided the CIA with more than just stories. He gave them photographs. He gave them specific addresses. He gave them contact names. Citrin claimed to know a man named Adolf Schuttelmeyer. The man lived in a German community near Tunja, Colombia. According to Citrin, the individual lived on a protected farm. He received regular visitors from Argentina. His daily routine was visible. It included long walks and reading sessions in German. The evidence was physical. Citrin provided a photograph. In the frame, a middle-aged man with a mustache. He sits on the porch of a rural house. The image quality is low. It does not allow for a definitive identification. Events accelerated. More reports reached Washington. The search continued in silence. There was no turning back. October 1955. The physical evidence in the photograph was specific. The body posture matched perfectly. The shape of the mustache was identical. The camera captured the characteristic hands of Adolf Hitler. Long fingers. A distinct scar on the back of the left hand. These were not generic traits. They were biological markers. Philip Citrin did not look for fame. He did not seek out journalists. He provided his report to American intelligence officers and then vanished. There were no book deals, no paid television interviews, no attempts to sell the story to tabloids. This was not the behavior of a con artist. It was the protocol of a witness who had seen something dangerous. Why did he stay silent? Publicity brings scrutiny. Scrutiny leads to discovery. Citrin chose anonymity over profit. But this was only the beginning. The arrival of the submarines U-530 and U-977 in Argentina raised immediate alarms. They were not just carrying surrendering sailors. Investigators analyzed the cargo manifests. The numbers did not add up. There were massive gaps between the official declarations and the actual physical capacity of the vessels. The U-530 claimed to carry only cigarettes. Yet, the commander ordered the total destruction of all navigation logs before docking. Every map was burned. Every coordinate was erased. The U-977 claimed a standard crew complement. But the storage rooms were packed. They carried enough food and water for a journey twice as long as the one they reported. The footage shows empty crates and hollowed-out bulkheads. The infrastructure in Bariloche was not built for tourists. At Lake Nahuel Huapi, the building served a different purpose. Hacienda San Ramon was a fortress. It featured reinforced concrete walls and advanced radio communication arrays. Underground tunnels connected the main house to secondary structures. It was a military command center disguised as a private residence. It got worse. The Alco farm sat near the Chilean border. The location was a tactical choice. It was inaccessible by road. Arrival was only possible by aircraft or a single narrow mountain trail. The site provided a 360-degree view of the valley. Sentries could see any approach from miles away. At first glance, a remote ranch, but in reality, a high-security extraction point. The construction projects required millions of dollars in untraceable currency. Laborers worked in shifts under armed guard. They built bunkers where there should have been wine cellars. They installed air filtration systems in the middle of the wilderness. The trail of evidence ended at the tree line. The estate featured a private landing strip. It was equipped with independent power generators and a network of underground bunkers reinforced against aerial bombardment. These are not the features of a vacation home. This was a facility built to hide a high-value target. Local testimonies from the Bariloche region tell a consistent story. During the 1950s and 60s, multiple witnesses reported an older man matching Hitler's physical description. Catalina Gomero worked as a domestic employee at a local German farm. She described a man who received extreme deference from everyone in the household. The man followed a rigid protocol. He never spoke to the local staff. He maintained a strict schedule for every meal. German newspapers arrived for him regularly via diplomatic pouch. The routine was military in its precision. Skeptics point to a specific detail. Gomero reported serving meat, while Hitler was a known vegetarian, but the facts offer an explanation. Hitler adopted a meatless diet to manage chronic gastrointestinal issues. A man in his 60s living in exile lacked access to specialized physicians. He likely abandoned dietary restrictions out of physical necessity. There was no room for error. Declassified CIA archives contain references to Operation Paperclip South. Officially, the program coordinated the resettlement of German technical personnel in South America, but the records suggest a much larger scope. This was more than a recruitment drive for scientists. The operation included protocols for high-ranking political leaders. These men were seen as assets in the Cold War against Soviet communism. Their survival was a strategic priority for Western intelligence. Events accelerated in the financial sector. Swiss banks handled the finances of the Third Reich for years. These institutions maintained active links with Argentine banks throughout the 1950s. The archives show a pattern. Regular transfers of large sums moved into specific accounts in Buenos Aires. This was a financial lifeline. It was a dedicated support network for Germans in hiding. The money never stopped flowing. Thus, the infrastructure for a second life was complete. 1979. Money transfers from Europe to South America continued even then. Most high-ranking fugitives were already dead or in custody, but the flow of capital did not stop. The German community in Argentina functioned as a state within a state. It was a closed system. They lived by a specific calendar. Private gatherings marked the birth of the Führer and the founding of the Reich. Their libraries were filled with texts banned in Bonn and Berlin. In their classrooms, teachers taught a different version of the Second World War. This was not just nostalgia. It was a functional network. It provided any fugitive with a house, a salary, and total silence. Then there is the ice. 1938. While Europe braced for a continental war, Berlin looked at the South Pole. They called it the Third German Antarctic Expedition. On paper, it was about whale oil. In reality, it was a military survey. The ship MS Schwabenland reached the coast. 2 Dornier seaplanes launched from its deck. For 3 months, they flew over the white wasteland. They mapped 600,000 square kilometers of territory. Every few miles, they dropped metal swastikas into the snow. They claimed the land for the Reich. International law ignored them. The Nazis didn't care. The aerial photos showed something impossible. Parts of the region, named New Swabia, were not solid ice. The cameras captured geothermal hotspots. The ice was thin. Warm water currents flowed beneath the surface. For a high command planning for every scenario, this was a strategic jackpot. Why build a base in the desert when you can hide under the ice? At first glance, it was a scientific mission, but in reality, it was a construction survey. Captain Alfred Richer commanded the expedition. He kept a personal diary. It stayed hidden for decades. His notes mentioned things left out of the official logs. He wrote about vast underground caverns. He described natural tunnels stretching for kilometers beneath the glaciers. He even noted architectural formations that looked artificial. Events accelerated. Richer began setting up supply depots. He marked them on classified maps. These coordinates were never shared with the global scientific community. They were secrets for the SS. The personnel list was the biggest clue. The expedition didn't just carry biologists, it carried German engineers. These men were not experts in penguins or sea life. They were specialists in deep rock mining and ventilation systems. Their reports were found in captured archives after the war. The documents were technical. They analyzed one thing: the viability of permanent underground habitation. The blueprints were ready. 1945. The Third Reich was collapsing, but secret projects continued in the shadows. Documents recovered from the SS Ahnenerbe archives point to a specific location: Base 211. This was not a myth. It was a recorded plan for polar construction. The blueprints detailed underground installations designed for total isolation. These were not temporary shelters. Engineers designed them to function independently for decades. The documents referenced Project Ultima Thule. This was a blueprint for a self-sufficient Antarctic fortress. The technical specifications described a massive complex. Geothermal energy would provide constant power. The base included biological laboratories, residential sectors, and massive industrial workshops. The goal was simple. The Reich wanted a facility that could operate for years without a single shipment from the outside world. Heinrich Himmler took personal control. He formed a specialized SS division for this purpose. This unit was the Ahnenerbe Forschungsgruppe. He recruited the top scientists in Germany. They received unlimited funding and a single directive: master alternative energy and electromagnetic propulsion. Why was the SS obsessed with the ice? At first glance, a scientific expedition, but in reality, a search for a new frontier of war. They focused on technology that didn't require fossil fuels. Events accelerated. During the final months of the war, Allied pilots began reporting strange phenomena. They called them Foo Fighters. These were metallic, disc-shaped objects. The pilots watched as the crafts performed impossible maneuvers. The flight patterns defied physics. The objects demonstrated instantaneous acceleration. They changed direction at speeds that would crush a human pilot. No known engine of the 1940s could produce such power. The most detailed reports came from United States military intelligence. The camera footage was grainy, but the facts were clear. Something was in the sky that did not belong to the Allies or the Soviets. It got worse. The reports suggested these crafts were not just sightings, but functional prototypes. The archives linked these aerial anomalies directly to the secret research in the Antarctic. The scale of the project was massive. The documents remain fragmented. The witnesses are mostly gone. But the designs for the base and the propulsion systems exist in the records. Thus, the legend of the secret polar base became a matter of military record.